The political spectrum. The political spectrum is a simple line graph in which we try to classify people's political positions. Its origins go back to the French Revolution. After the French overthrew the king in the 1790s, they organized themselves in a general assembly and they sat together based on their political beliefs. On the right side of the room sat the reactionaries, and closer to the center were the conservatives. Moderates were in the middle, and on the left you had liberals, and last but not least you had radicals sitting on the far left side of the room. Today we are going to talk about these political positions and how they have influenced our politics. Let's start on the far right. This political category is reactionary. A reactionary is someone who likes how things used to be. They are reacting to what is currently happening in politics or society and want to go back. Imagine if someone talked about the 50s being the good old days, as if they really wanted to have society like that today. They might be considered a reactionary. Back in the 1940s and 30s, Hitler's Nazis were considered a reactionary party because they wanted to go back to how they believed Germany used to be. The problem with that is that led to military conquest and genocide. Conservative as a political philosophy on the political spectrum simply means that they, for the most part, like politics and society how it is and don't want much change. So the key with conservatives is that they don't want to see much change. Keep in mind that conservative on the political spectrum might be a little different than how some people use conservative in American politics. As you can see, moderates are in the middle, and that is where they are politically. They are a balance between conservatives and liberals. Liberal on the political spectrum means somebody that wants some change. In modern politics, some groups try to put a negative connotation on this term, but keep in mind there is a difference between liberal on the political spectrum and how some politicians use it. Liberal simply means you want change. Radical means you want drastic change. It is the opposite of reactionary. With drastic change, you see that this group would be the type to overthrow governments and definitely not go back to how things used to be. Communists and revolutionaries tend to get put in this category. As you can see, the political parties do typically cover different areas of the political spectrum. It is important to note that both parties cover the moderate section. In our political system, we have right-leaning and left-leaning moderates. When politicians look at where Americans stand on the political positions, most Americans actually identify themselves as being in the middle with left or right leanings. In America, we have very few radicals and reactionaries. The political parties do change over time. After the Civil War, we only had two main political parties, Democrats and Republicans. The Democrats wanted to keep things the same or go back to pre-Civil War days, so they were on the right side of the political spectrum. Today, they are on the left side of the spectrum because political parties change every year. The big switch on the spectrum for Democrats and Republicans often goes back to 1933 with FDR, the Great Depression, and the New Deal. The Democrats were the conservatives until the Depression. Hoover was the Republican president before FDR and didn't believe that the government should get involved in the Depression and supported what we now know as trickle-down economics, meaning that if the rich are doing well, they will eventually translate to the working middle class too. FDR came in as president promoting an active government with large social programs to help out the unemployed. It was at this point that Democrats decided they wanted change and a more active government, so they leapfrogged over the Republicans to the left on the political spectrum, and they became more liberal. Remember, liberal meaning that they want change. Here is just a quick look at some liberal presidents we have had over the years. The first big one is Lincoln. Keep in mind, this was back in the day when Republicans were liberals, and Lincoln obviously wanted change in the political system. He is the president of the Emancipation Proclamation and freeing the slaves, which shook up hundreds of years of history. John Kennedy is another example of a liberal president. His famous line is, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." He asked the nations of the world to join together to fight tyranny, poverty, and war, which he called the common enemies of man. Kennedy desired for greater internationalism. A third example of a liberal president is Franklin Roosevelt. FDR, as he is commonly known, led during a time of economic crisis. During the first 100 days in office, FDR headed the New Deal programs. These were designed to produce relief, recovery, and reform. Relief offered government jobs for the unemployed. Recovery helped with economic growth, and reform came in the form of new banks and transportation. Here are a few of the moderate presidents we have had. Remember, moderates tend to lean either to the left or right. The first is Bill Clinton. Clinton was a Democrat, therefore leaned to the left. Clinton would have been considered liberal, but because Congress was conservative at the time, he had to govern from the middle. Clinton implemented the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy as a step towards full homosexual military integration. Another moderate president is George H.W. Bush. Don't confuse him with the most recent Bush. This is his father. George H.W. Bush, or Bush Sr., was a Republican, therefore leaning to the right. Bush Sr. entered office as the world was changing. The Berlin Wall came down and the Soviet Union collapsed. Bush Sr. also dealt with military operations in Panama and the Persian Gulf. A third moderate president was Richard Nixon. Nixon was a Republican, therefore leaning to the right. The Vietnam War was in full swing when Nixon came into office, and though it seemed as if he initially escalated the war, he ended up ending all U.S. involvement. Nixon also enforced desegregation in Southern schools and established the Environmental Protection Agency. Here are some of the conservative presidents. The first is George W. Bush, Bush Sr.'s son. During his terms as president, Bush had to deal with two of our country's greatest tragedies, Hurricane Katrina and 9/11. Bush also enacted the No Child Left Behind Act and other important acts. Another conservative president is Ronald Reagan. Reagan implemented many new political and economic initiatives. The most commonly known one is referred to as Reaganomics. This advocates reducing tax rates in order to spur economic growth, controlling money to reduce inflation, and reducing government spending. A third conservative president is Dwight Eisenhower, commonly known as Ike. The main thing that Ike started was NASA. This was started to compete with the Soviet Union in the space race. He continued New Deal programs and enlarged Social Security. Remember, the political spectrum ranges from radicals on the left to reactionary on the right. The political spectrum is just a simple way to classify who believes what.